Hey everybody, Brandon here. Welcome back to another game on my road to chess mastery. Today we are going to be covering game number 2 in my 12th tournament. And let's see how the game continues. Now this is a very interesting one because this is the first time we are seeing a change in my repertoire. I have only played c5 or knight to f6 as black. However, I am ready to change things up. As you might have seen from previous games, I play okay in tactical positions, but I noticed, I'm going to change how I'm sitting now. I noticed that I enjoyed endgames a lot. They were very interesting to me, and even analyzing these games, I noticed that I would talk more about the endings, and even still, my understanding of endgames are definitely better than my understanding of middle games. However, I wanted an opening that reflected this. The Sicilian, it's a good opening, one of the best. However, it doesn't reflect my knowledge of the endgame whatsoever, because there's not really too many endgames you'll get into. Most of the Sicilians you'll play will be decided in the middle game. So I changed it up, and let's see how it continues. E4 and C6. There we go. The Caro Kann is my new opening, and is what you will be seeing for pretty much the rest of the career of mine. And I saw d4 and I played d5 here. We see knight to c3. I took on e4, which is the most classical approach, and bishop f5. This has some improvements over the French in the fact that you develop this bishop early, get it outside of the pawn chain, and this is the bad bishop, but it's developed early and it's not stuck on c8 and grasping for air. Knight to g3, bishop g6. Now we see bishop c4, and I played e6. Knight to f3, knight to d7, just preventing any knight to e5s. I thought this was a good idea. And also, knight to h4 I can take, so that's not an option either. Bishop to f4, knight g to f6. Now knight h4 is possible, but again, in these positions you shouldn't really care, because even if they take, this type of structure is realistically pretty much impossible to break down for black, or for white to break down black structure. So queen to e2, knight to b6, bishop to b3, and queen takes d4. That's right, I went for the pawn. So realistically they should probably castle or something along those lines, but unfortunately they didn't. And when they don't, well, d4 is hanging. So unfortunately, either I win the bishop pair or I win the pawn. And I was happy to win the pawn here. This is a very sketchy pawn to win. Let's be clear, very sketchy. Rook d1 is coming. It's just scary all around. But bishop e5 looks natural. However, we should also mention that I wasn't just attacking that pawn. Only am I not attacking that pawn. I'm attacking b2. I was attacking f4, but also I was attacking h4, and now I'm up a pawn and a piece. But the game doesn't end here, and nor do the complications. We see castles. Knight b to d7. So I'm just trying to cover my king a little bit. Rook to d4, attacking my queen here. So it's a little scary. But I do have the move queen to g5. I thought this was necessary immediately instead of queen to h6. I thought this was a very interesting move because the whole point of this is if bishop to f4, I can just move away, right? Queen to h6, bishop to f4, a little bit more complicated. I pretty much have to go back, and who would want to go into anything where you have this, well, that doesn't work because queen takes d4, but where you want to voluntarily put yourself in the road to discoveries here. This looks just atrocious. So this queen to g5 check, the whole point of it is, well, bishop to f4, again, I can just go maybe c5, a5, doesn't matter, just I can get out of dodge and my queen is safe. However, f4 had to be seen, and I did see it. I ended up playing queen g4, and now, well, I'm trying to trade. Worst case scenario, I can always kind of reroute back to h6, but of course my opponent does not go into that and does not let me trade queens, as if I trade queens, I'm just up a piece and a pawn, and this is a pretty straightforward win. Now, how do you play here? Realistically, it's a little difficult. I thought the only move here was c5. The only point here is they are threatening the move f5 here, winning a piece. Queen h4, f5 doesn't really matter. So c5 is realistically the only way to deal with that, and the whole point here is if they move, say, to rook c4, then I have the move b5, and well, their rook is pretty much trapped. They have to go, so we're like, oh, sorry. That's a interesting move, but c4 and then or b5 and then yeah, just like c4 or something here. But pretty much the moral of the situation here is that they won't be attacking me on the 4th rank after the move c5. It's a bit of a provocative move because it does allow this followed by bishop a4, but realistically I'm still up so much material. I'm up a piece, a pawn, and an exchange. So that's 6 points of material, which is pretty much a rook and a pawn if you think about it. But here, after this, I play castles. If I really wanted to, I could just castle long here, and this is safe. This is really safe for me, and I could just play a move like knight b6, which is coming quite fast, or even a6. I was just worried about some queen a5s, but realistically, this shouldn't be an issue. It's just when you see this type of position, it just looks a little scary, right? But there's always just knight takes e5, and even queen b4 or something at the end, if I really wanted to, or even a6. But the whole point here is that it's okay, and I can go into this. It's just, why allow any complications of any sort when you can just castle long, give up a piece, and still be up a piece? So now I played a tactic that won a pawn, and I played bishop to f6. And the way this wins a pawn is, well, after taking, I can take on f4, and then take on f6 with the queen. My pawn structure is still very, very solid. And again, I'm up 4 points of material, so this should be a win now. Let's see how it continues, though. I think it's a really interesting and instructive game for how it follows up. Queen to d2, queen to d4, trying to force trades. Again, this position, now I'm trying to take on a4 if they don't take. So force your opponent to simplify. And when you simplify, when you're up material, it's simple. Simplifying is simple, as they should say. Queen takes d4, c takes d4, h4, h6, just bishop h7s if I ever need it. Bishop b3, rook h to c8. Now you can see I'm targeting the c2 pawn, but I have a devious idea here. It's not as simple as it looks. Knight e2, e5, g3, rook c7. Now let's be clear here. You might be thinking, okay, there's not going to actually be anything because they could just play rook c1. And this was something I was preparing for. Rook d1, king h8, just, in case I want an f6. Knight to g1, f6, okay, why not? Knight to f3, and rook fc8. And now this is the tricky position. Realistically, you have to play a move like rook d2. However, this is also not so great. And even here, I can pretty much get away with bishop h5, and this should be a very clear win. But I thought I would go for a more interesting position where there's not really much you can do here because there are some threats in this position. And after rook c1, unfortunately, they missed my biggest threat, which was d3, exploiting the fact that the c2 pawn is pinned. And if they move it in any way, c3, there's d2 check, and we win either the exchange or we promote if rook c2 with checkmate. But also, they can't take because, well, rook takes c1. So it's pinned in multiple ways. And I think this is very instructive because you always need to think about how you can push your advantage to the most it can be. And this is exactly what you can do in this type of position is all my pieces are perfectly placed. There has to be some sort of way to win. And I started calculating, and when I played this whole idea with rook c7 and rook c8, I saw this idea of d3, and I was super excited, and I had to go for it. Rook c1, d3, king to a1. Now trying to prepare a c3, but unfortunately, it's kind of over after the move e4. The reason why this is over is, again, this pawn is pinned, d3 is pinned, so they can't do anything about taking on d3, but also after knight to d4 or knight to d2, either way, I was planning the move e3, and we can see that here, after knight d4, e3 is just crushing, and I'm promoting a pawn now, as, again, their pawn is still pinned. If they move away, for example, here, I can play a move like d2 if I wanted to, or after rook d1, just maybe rook d4, and I'll sack the exchange and play e2 and promote. But there's just so many good parts of this position that it's really hard to just say that there's just one thing here, but that is one clear plan. Knight to e6 now, but after knight to e6, the exchange doesn't matter here. I just played d2, as we're threatening to promote with checkmate. Rook g1, e2, and a3. I promote, and now I have a queen. I sack the exchange, and they didn't take. They played h5, but even here, it's still over. Or after h5, rook takes b2 with check, and queen to b1 is checkmate. And yeah, I really enjoy looking back at this game because I think there's a lot of interesting tactics, especially this d3 and e3 idea, but it's not really so noticeable immediately. I mean, when you have this type of position where you're completely dominating, you're up a lot of material, you know that there's going to be something eventually, but in my style, usually I'll just simplify. I won't go for any crazy tactics, but this was just too hard to resist. Anyways, that covers game number 2, and I hope you guys really enjoyed this one, and I will see you guys in game number 3. Anyways, now I have a 3-game advantage against Honorud, but yeah, I think this was a cool game. So yep, that's all. So I'll see you in game number 4. Have a good one.